Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Douville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who, despite years of working together in 3 shipped projects, still can't distinguish me from a Cadillac.
Tim Longo. I think your hello is getting louder with each
hello!
Yeah.
I'm going to get a megaphone for the next game.
Great. I shouldn't have mentioned anything.
Do you know what I'm referring to there?
No. Wait, what? That was a reference to something?
Yes. Do you know how to pronounce my last name?
Douville?
Yes. Do you know how you said it on DLC? Hey, plug for DLC, great podcast. Jeff Canada and Christian Spicer. You said Douville.
Oh, well, sometimes I choose.
Yeah, sometimes.
It's based on my whim.
Sometimes you go with the Cadillac. I got it. I'm the Cadillac lead programmer.
Yeah. So, you're the Douville. Yeah, I like it. Okay, well, that might stick. I can't pronounce anybody's name anymore. I'm just terrible at that. Well, but you'd think it's
no problem, Mr. Longa.
It's not just 3. Well, yeah, I still have a good friend of ours actually who does not pronounce the hard G, and I don't have the heart to tell him otherwise. It's somebody you know. I won't call him out on air, but Longo. Wow. And it just drives me crazy, but I can't. I just feel bad. I don't want to tell him.
Yeah,
I don't think he listens to podcasts. So
I have no qualms about telling you.
Sure. Okay, I'll let you know who it is. You can. Yeah.
All right. Enough about my name. Let's move on to tonight's new game in the series. I guess we usually like to throw back and say, "Hey, how about that chat with Bill Roper?"
Yeah. Yes. Very fun. Very fun. Yeah.
That was amazing. The little bombs of info there were great, but also it was a great insight into Blizzard generally, and not necessarily specifically Warcraft, but often just kind of talking about that company, which is pretty impenetrable to those of us who haven't worked inside it. We have talked with people who've worked there, but never really somebody of Bill's stature, and that was really kind of cool, and certainly longevity because he was there for quite a while.
Yeah, and ironically, just this morning I was reading, Gamma Sutra, as I do every morning, and they reran an article which maybe you saw on Wyack. What's his name? Wyatt? Wyack? One of the main programmers that Bill mentioned. And remember, Bill was telling the story about the 2 guys who were playing the first ever multiplayer match.
Right.
And how, Paul, oh man, I feel bad now. I'm not remembering. I didn't bring it up. Anyway, they ran a story where he is telling, in the article, he's telling that same story about the first time they played and the impact that it had on the company and on Warcraft and on kind of like the future of how they built their company. And I thought it was pretty cool timing that they reran that article talking about the same story that Bill told us. No.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think I had heard that one before about the desync bug. That's a common, desynchronization is a common RTS bug. RTS is usually made synchronous to limit the amount of stuff you need to send over the network. So that's why that's done, because the more the games can keep themselves similar than not without, with the less information you can send, the better. So they basically keep in sync that way. So anyway, that's a common bug, and we have a former colleague, Nathan Martz, who would tell me about Brutal Legend having basically the same problem early on. Is keeping it in sync. And things that making sure you had a random number generator for effects, but not that affected anything that was simulated by the game. That was essentially entirely non-random. Which was something else we kind of talked about earlier in the cast. I think the one before.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, turning to Super Metroid, we take ourselves back to 1994. Which is that a year we visited yet? I feel like
we've been 93. Was Dot was 93 or 4? Yeah, I forget. Yeah, we were around there.
We're right around there. So we're not venturing too far afield. And not too far from Warcraft. This was a Nintendo R&D project for the SNES. The director was Yoshi Sakamoto. And, there aren't too many games out there that have a whole genre named for them, or half named for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I feel like, to that point, in my day-to-day life, there are a few games that we mention, on any given day that we use because everyone understands what we're talking about when we say it. It's an interesting, it's an interesting reference that it's been distilled down to that, such a formulaic thing for this game. But it's true. And getting back into it, it's as usual with this podcast, it kind of all comes rushing back about why that is. And it's very front and center and obvious why. Simple example, not jumping into the specifics of the session we played, but the simple, silly example of as soon as you come down off of your ship after the first intro, you can go left and right, left or right. And that one simple concept, which, I don't know, it's just something that expands out and is, expands your imagination for what's possible.
Yeah, I mean, I actually haven't made my way back up to the ship to go right, although I feel like I could have at one point, and maybe.
Yeah, you totally can.
Yeah. Right out of the gate, I think you're kind of stuck. But yeah, it's the other game, would be Castlevania, but they call them collectively Metroidvanias, and for good reason. I mean, this is kind of fundamentally pretty key to the Nintendo school of design and the Japanese school of design. I feel like these are the sorts of games that when people talk about the Japanese impact on the American design aesthetic, these are the games they're talking about.
Yeah, one of the notes I wrote down, which is not fully fleshed out, but it's the perfect. I don't know. I'll use the word perfect, but no game's perfect. But I will in this case. It's the perfect combination and crossover between skill-based exploration over time and sort of tactical decision-making, and with a little bit of puzzle elements in there as well, world puzzles at least, right. Meaning putting two and two together, right, and getting through doors. And it's basically an expanded lock and key design with some meaning behind each of those things on kind of a multiplied level, which, to your point, if you distill, many games down, that's really what it's distilled down to, right? Whether you're shooting a gun, whether you're jumping, whether you're, whatever you're swinging a whip or what have you, like they all can be distilled down to that. And this is the 2D side-scroller version of that. And we were talking in the pre-show, I was looking at a timeline of Nintendo's games because I was interested I kind of was curious on sort of the chicken or the egg, or what came first when it comes to their sort of three big properties and what might have influenced each other, because we don't know for sure, and I haven't read up on it, if it's out there in the world, but they're pretty tight-lipped anyway. And it'll be interesting to see if there's any chance in hell we'll be able to actually get a guest. But between Mario, Zelda, and Metroid, there's the similar crossover mechanics of, if you just take Zelda, of get a new mechanic, open new doors to yourself, and expanding the exploration and kind of that really well designed world structure that allows the player to very methodically open up their option and choice space, so they're not overwhelmed, but still feel the sense of empowerment slowly over time. That escalation of mechanics is basically like, 101 when it comes to how, in my opinion, and I think, what you're saying, your opinion, how things should be designed from a spatial perspective. And so it turns out that Super Mario Brothers, which is, only scrolling to the right, for the most part, Super Mario Brothers in 86, Metroid 1 also came out in 86, and Zelda was in 87. So they all were being designed and built in tandem with each other, it seems like. And so it's pretty telling that there's a lot of crossover between the three of them when it comes to that.
Yeah, and the teams and the company would have been small at that time, at least in the sort of video game division, because I feel like Nintendo was something else before, right? Weren't they cards? Weren't they some kind of
card? Yeah, they did cards. Yeah, and
I forget what those are called, Hanafuke or Hana something. But anyway, they did cards, basically, a sort of Japanese playing card, right? And then they dive into this post original Crash, and yeah, they can't have had a huge team.
I think I noticed it was like 15 people, maybe something like that. Which just anecdotally, that's a lot of the buzz right now for No Man's Sky. 15 people made that game too, but then I guess I'm just looking at the at the wiki and stuff, and they said I guess they had a company called Intelligent Systems also help them program it. So I don't know if that includes the 15 or not.
Right.
Yeah.
That's true, and they're I think they're still involved. Actually, I don't know if they bought them or something like that. But yeah, my Nintendo history is not too deep. My own history with the Nintendo and with the Metroid games starts with Metroid Prime, as it did for you, I think, or you maybe played Metroid 2.
Oh yeah, no, I Metroid 1.
You played the original Metroid.
Yeah, I played the original. I did have an NES. I did not have a Super NES back in the day, but I did have a Game Boy, and I played the heck out of Metroid 2.
And do you having not played Metroid 2 at all, I did dive into Metroid a little bit this week, and it's pretty unforgiving by modern standards. But I'm curious to what degree Metroid 2 resembles the game we're playing today.
I haven't gone back to 2 in quite a while. My memory is that it's closer to 1, though, than it is to 2.
Okay.
Especially because it's on the Game Boy, and I don't think that some, like you said, save system and some of the more advanced abilities that we haven't gotten yet in this game. Looking ahead a little bit. Definitely were not in either of those two games. So the world structure and stuff was the same, though. I don't believe you left the one installation that you were in 1 or 2, right? So
okay, yeah. In the original Metroid, you basically you basically play as far as you can and get codes that you can enter. I haven't gone back to play it to actually have to enter a code, but I took them down just in case. And you basically, whenever you die, you start back at the beginning, but with the same gear that you had picked up through the level. So you're going further and further in, know. And after a while, it's like, well, if I were to die like an hour and a half in, I'm not going to start to play that hour and a half again. I mean, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So I'm very thankful for the advance of saves because I am not a 10-year-old kid with a summer before me anymore.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't think we really necessarily planned it, but I think we chose the right Metroid to play, especially for the podcast, for those sort of a little bit more modern conventions in here and world structure, and they do some interesting things with the NES. Or the Super NES system that maybe you can get into later and stuff. I don't know the technical side of it, but I think it'd be too hard to go back to 86.
Yeah, it's hard and it's kind of ugly on the eyes.
Yeah.
Usually that sort of thing doesn't bother me too much, but it does. There is a point beyond which you're like, wow, that's pretty ugly.
Oh, my bad.
Whoop whoop. Yep, I heard that. Okay, so this game is something that touches us directly because we took stuff from Metroid Prime into Republic Commando, but I mean I'd say even deeper than that, the DNA of sort of weapon progression in Starfighter maybe begins here too. With multiple weapons that you get over time, and it's very kind of bare bones. There's nothing complicated about the weapons design in the Starfighter games. But that idea of sort of progressing, okay, now you're comfortable with these, and let's give you that. I do contrast it a little bit with Mario, in that the Mario games, and I know you're not a big Mario player, but I think in Mario it's much more player skill based in the sense that I think you basically can do everything at the beginning.
Yeah, no, I agree. No, and I didn't mean necessarily that there was direct crossover. I'm just saying if you add in exploration from Zelda, skill from Mario,
right,
you know what I mean? Like each of them have their emphasis.
Yes.
But there's the Venn diagram crossover of all three of them, where you can kind of find the convergence of those three, what the DNA of Nintendo really is all about.
Yeah.
And I'm totally generalizing, of course, but that's what I meant. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah. Because here, they're definitely, I mean, it's all about getting those skills kind of, I mean, I wouldn't say RPG-like, but I mean, you are just kind of building more skills to give the player. The player also has to be skilled at them in many cases, right? I mean, you can't, you have to, time your shots and time your jumps, especially the sort of navigation mechanics are very player skill based. And the rest of it is sort of like, it sort of reminds me of early open world games in the sense, and it is kind of an early open world game. Yeah. In the sense that you're gated from going certain areas of maps until you've got a good mental map of where you are,
Yeah. So
it's sort of as it's adding these abilities, it's also adding sort of more understanding of how the world connects, for example. And so you kind of, as you're getting comfortable with something, you're finally allowed to push past the boundaries a little bit as you get these different abilities and these different keys for different locks, basically.
It's the onion layer that we, layers of the onion that we talk a lot about. I mean, as far as influences on me, I mean, anyone who worked with me on the Tomb Raider reboot, like I wouldn't shut up about Metroid when we were talking about that game, right? And it's like, because we were talking about the island, right? And the island is the world, and I was just harping constantly on, we want the player to eventually inherently know the island, right, as this cohesive world. Even though we weren't necessarily making an open world game, it was all about, and I wrote down a note for this as well, that one of the things, I think one of the, not to overuse the P word, but one of the paradigms for the Metroid games is, like you said, this sense of learning a space over time, embracing the world and the space, and through like really good level design and rolling out of mechanics, forcing the player to learn and teaching the player what they can use where in really well crafted ways. So like you said, you become, kind of one with the world in a gradual sense. And that's again, like a fundamental, right? You kind of, you can easily break that, of course, if you don't do a good job at that rollout, but it's a thing that, has been copied ever since, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it even shows up in Firewatch, which is a much smaller space, but there's still areas that you can't get to. You only get to them because you get some object that allows you to get to them, like an axe. So you can drop a tree across a crevice that you wouldn't be able to cross otherwise. So that kind of happens there as well. Very narrative-focused game. And actually, I was going to turn to narrative next. This actually seems to me in a bit of a sweet spot, kind of lore-wise, between Mario, which is kind of incomprehensible from a narrative standpoint.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's really...
One word for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, mushrooms.
Yeah,
okay. Yeah, and then on the other end, you have, the legend of Zelda, right? I mean, it's meant to be this storybook kind of myth. Yeah, exactly. And it's supposed to, and we're kind of there in between, which is, it's more of a sort of straight survival story, I guess, if there's a story at all. But there is a ton of narrative stuff in the environment, which they actually take to the next level in something like Metroid Prime, where you actually literally scan the environment to learn more about it, and that's something that you do there. But here it's just as you go into rooms, you're seeing these objects, and they're kind of, I don't know. There's a consistency to it all in setting up a world that isn't there in Mario. So I mean, I guess I was just thinking that it's kind of similar in that sort of sweet spot as well between Mario and Zelda, narratively.
There's I mean, they are applying even so. They have their text crawl in the beginning, and they're kind of doing the flashbacks and stuff. Not to jump into the second segment, but then they give names to planets and names to places, right? And they return to those, and they want to give meaning to the enemy, and they have a history that they're trying to tell, and some association with the baby Metroid or whatever they call it,
Metroid larva.
Larva, yeah, and as a kind of a visual storytelling or environmental storytelling, to your point, a small thing a note I wrote down that I didn't notice until I had restarted the game or went back to the main menu is that even so. There's the scene in the opening sort of cutscene sections where you eventually, or actually no, you get to the installation where the larva is, and you find the beaker or whatever the glass case it was in broken, and all the dead bodies are laying on the ground.
Right.
That's the main menu as well. And so you see the dead bodies like from the main menu. They're already telling you what's going to happen. You know what I mean? Even though you haven't seen it yet. Of course, you can't. You can't even see what the dead bodies are really because it's so low.
And that's probably the axis where this kind of pushes and is kind of on the other side of a Zelda or a Mario is that it's a dark story.
Yeah, right.
I mean, Mario is, I don't know, maybe existentially dark, but it's light and colorful and whatever. And then Zelda is, it's a hero story, right? And you know that. And
yeah. And
storybook things disappear, right? And it's a storybook, and other things that I don't know when Pokemon came out, but it couldn't have been too much later than this. It's the same sorts of things that you see, stories, storybook. People don't get killed, if you come back
through there,
point. But here, the very background and from the very beginning, it's more, to use a term we usually misuse, but it's a little more mature in its setup, right? I mean, this is, there's stakes in a way that there really aren't, or with a different tone, I guess, than the stakes are in those other games.
Yeah, so. That's a good point. I don't know why that's never dawned on me because I was telling Brett in the pre-show before we started of the Nintendo properties, which Brett knows, and we've talked about it before. I'm not the biggest Nintendo fan. I guess I shouldn't necessarily admit that on air, but Metroid is the one property in the Metroid or in the Nintendo pantheon that I actually has resonated with me, and I'm wondering if maybe it is a tonal thing. I love sci-fi, of course, etc., and maybe that darker tone. Even as a kid, I was more into. You can see a little bit of alien influence in here and a few other things. Kind of popping in. I haven't checked the dates on everything, but there's some early sci-fi film
Alien,
influence.
which was in 1979.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
and Aliens, which I think was 1988. So it's definitely well past all of that. And even the very first Metroid would have been post Alien, and I'm sure it took its.
It was 86. Yeah, and I guess we can't. We can't go on without at least mentioning a little bit the Boba Fett as bounty hunter and Samus as bounty hunter, and their armor designs there's some similarities there that we with the visor design and stuff. But
no, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Definitely. Yeah, so some callbacks to Star Wars, and I mean basically of the late 70s film science fiction renaissance to a degree, to sort of fill out the tone and the look of the character. Even probably her gender, which I guess was a big surprise in '86. As I recall, you only found that out at the end, right? She took off her helmet.
Yeah, in the very end. And they kind of overdo it a bit here.
Yeah, here it's more explicit. Yeah, whenever she dies.
Yeah, it's a little ridiculous.
You get the bikini shot, which is a little silly. It's like, what happened to the suit? I don't. Huh?
Yeah. The tone, though, and the music is just great. I mean, as far as like that sort of 70s sci-fi, just very stylized music that's pretty minimalistic and subtle, of course. But they could have gone farther with it, so they chose to do minimalistic music. But I don't know. That's really been sticking with me as we've been playing the short while.
Well, and that's probably another axis where it does kind of it is kind of different from the others, because Mario and Zelda are both very. I mean, Zelda's got appropriately heroic themes, right? And even when you open a chest or whatever, do. I mean, you just got like this building, like, oh, this is so cool. And of course, Mario's got tons and tons of recognizable music. And I wouldn't have said, looking back at a Metroid game, that I remembered anything about the music. So it's good that you point that out, because it is so minimal, and I don't. Like, it's underscoring how you're supposed to feel maybe some dread about this environment, or mystery.
Yeah, mystery is that's the word I was going to use for sure. There's definitely a couple rooms even where the music shifts and the visuals kind of really reinforce each other, the music and the visuals, and there's this spooky kind of mysterious quality to it.
Okay, well let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and dive in to the first hour and a half to 2 hours or so, and talk brass tacks. Brass tacks.
Good brass
tacks.
Brass tacks. Yeah.
Yeah, we talk some test box.
Good.
Okay. Welcome back from the break. We're here talking Super Metroid with my co-host Tim Longo. I guess we'll dive right into it. I love, I'm going to say right off the bat, I love that opening cutscene, unskippable though it is.
You mean the with the text and the narration and all that stuff?
Yep.
Yeah, the black and white flashbacks, or the sepia tone.
Or sepia tone. Yeah, I love the text effect. It's not.
Oh yeah.
It's not exactly what's in something like Alien, but you can definitely feel the derivation of, like, the letters are kind of appearing, and it's like a written report or something, and then you're getting like her memories of I turned over the larva, and like it's telling you everything you needed to know. I guess essentially from Metroid 2, because I think this is basically a direct sequel to Metroid 2. I'm not sure that Metroid 1 had enough story to tie that together.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's other than like what is it, Mother Brain, and a few just specific like proper nouns, but yeah,
right.
Yeah, it was pretty cool, and her just even simple thing like her face and her helmet, in the back of that,
right, with the lighting that sort of surrounds her face. Yeah, it's really good stuff, and I was I was playing. I was like, oh man, this is even better than I expected it to be, having not played it. I have played a 2D, Metroid. I played Fusion on the
pretty good
Game Boy Advance, and that was excellent. I really liked that.
Same designer, same director, I think.
I gather there's a new it's just the new Metroid Federation Hunters. Or something like that.
It's Metroid Prime Federation Force, but it's
Federation Force, right?
Yeah, it's I don't know. It's not really a Metroid, spirit of Metroid game. It doesn't really have. I think it's just like co-op, like kind of wave attacks or something. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. Well, I've heard that it's pretty good, but I'm not surprised that it's. I mean, it clearly looked like, hey, we need to brand this somehow.
Yeah,
It doesn't feel like it's got the Metroid DNA, as it were.
Yeah.
And that Metroid DNA is problematic because it gets out and then it just takes over the world. You had talked about in the intro some of the technical effects. Art-wise, this is the era of pixel art, even more so than sort of the 8-bit. This 16-bit has the great crunchy pixel art. It's a little bit higher res than the older system, and it's also got a much better color palette. I forget how many colors exactly, but it's, it looks a lot better. And they can get some really subtle effects, even though they're using basically the pixel art. I mean, there's a reason why people like to go back and make, 16-bit derived games, more so than 8-bit derived games. I mean, I know that there's Shovel Knight, from a couple of years ago was hugely popular, and it was directly, all about being basically a Metroid game with really great pixel art.
Yeah, and Axiom Verge.
Axiom Verge, another one.
Yeah, there's been a string of them. I mean, I think the other reason, which we forgot to mention as far as like wanting to play this timing wise, is just there's been a glut of Metroid, retro, homage games, and it's the 25th anniversary of the SNES and Metro and Super Metroid, and so like it's on everyone's mind right now. But yeah, this is a sweet spot of that pixel art that I think there's so much nostalgia for, and so many indie devs are definitely returning to, which I think is cool.
Yeah, it feels like the indie games are starting to move maybe more towards low poly art now. I don't know.
And they're going to the history.
Next, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They're catching up as the tools catch up. But yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic look. And because I wasn't a person who had a SNES or any console at that time, that really stood out to me because I didn't expect it to look quite as lovely as it does. Even though it is obviously pixelated, it is very artistically pixelated, and that's a real nice thing to see. They
definitely nail their style, down to like, I don't know if you noticed, but if you're just standing still, she has an idle animation that's pretty nice for like a pixel just animation frames idle, and just there's a lot of nice touches, but then the overall character design like stands the test of time, and they just were always good at very clear messaging about what enemies' identities were and how you were likely going to interact with them and how they would interact with you. And damage types in general, I forgot to mention in the opening, but as far as influences go, it wouldn't be a podcast without the dog barking. Sorry about that. I forgot to mention, but just the design concept of damage types and weapon types and the lock and key nature of that, has progressed forward ever since as well, especially in FPSs and shooters. Halo being, obviously one of the biggest ones that really embrace that, and the concept of collection and collecting abilities and items and the meaning behind them in the macro gameplay and the micro gameplay, meaning I collect a thing that will now be a key for various locks that I've seen along the way, but oh, by the way, it's also a weapon that I will fire at something or that I can use in the micro gameplay. Like whether they intentionally thought of it that way or not, like the deconstruction of those two things is just fascinating and just so awesome that, and as far as like economy of design, I think these days, and I'm probably as much to blame as anyone as far as like a designer these days, the lazy way out is you design two different things, one thing that is for the macro and one thing that is for the micro, rather than the harder problem, which is designing one thing that does both, and you still teach the player how to use it in both ways. So really cool things that they set up even in the intro here where you're starting to learn basics.
Right, and I think what that comes down to is, in AAA games today, we're typically looking at, we have all this artistic, throughput, for lack of a better term. Like, we can make a lot of art and a lot of animation, and in that case, even if mechanically, like literally to the level of I push this button, it's the same. Then why not? I mean, basically, I'm going to pull the trigger or push the A button to open a door. Here, they made, I guess their limitations help them in that way, right? I mean, they're not going to animate opening a door, and they're not going to animate opening, 16 different types of doors, 16 types of different ways. They're just going to have all the doors work the same way, which is you shoot them with something, and the door opens. And then being able to use, so at that macro level, you're uncovering more of the map, as you said. And it is really a different verb. It's open. It just is still enabled by the same mechanic, which is shoot.
Yeah.
I feel like at AAA these days, we just have the bandwidth. It makes it easier to be lazy because, we have plenty of people to do these things, right? I mean, it's you might do, I was just reading about, No Man's Sky, over at Mode 7 Games. Paul Kilduff Taylor, I think is his name. His last name. Sorry, Paul, if you listen and if I got that wrong. But he was kind of deep diving into No Man's Sky and sort of being able to do infinitely much in a game, right? And he was talking about, the more you have verb-wise, the more necessarily shallow those verbs must be. And with a lot of our sort of stuff that we kind of kitchen sink into games these days, they tend to be very, very shallow. The core gameplay, that sort of moment to moment, 30 seconds of fun type stuff, might be really deep. But a lot of the stuff that we add on is the stuff that ends up being the sort of, I do a button press, I see something cool, and the door opens.
Yeah.
Or I press, I've basically already killed the enemy, but now I press a button and I see a cool animation of me, stabbing it 30 times and removing its head, right? I mean, it's like that. There's no mechanics behind that. It's just pressing the play button on a cool animation.
Yeah.
And here, you don't have a lot of things that you can do, but you're able to do quite a lot with them, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point about their constraints and what they were working with driving some of their design decisions, which is good. Definitely constraints, as I think we've talked about before, are always good. But it's the breadth versus depth debate, and which way you go, and you can give the player more opportunities and choices to make in both vectors. And yeah, to your point, when you have a multi-hundred person team, that you tend to go wider than deeper. But I think that I'm on the fly in this a little bit, but lazy design of that ilk kind of creates lazy players in a way too. And I feel like respecting, we've been on, and it comes up a lot, we've been on a dangerous trajectory of creating too many lazy players, right? And kind of just, as you said, with the sort of the contextual one button animation that explodes into, just big bombastic, action. It's really not, I think the discovery that, and the reason that a lot of us are kind of coming back to these classics like a Metroid game in our designs, or trying to at least, is that economy of design where the player feels smarter, right? They feel like they've achieved something more interesting when you've learned how to use this missile.
Right.
I picked up this missile, and
it's because you're transferring the constraints to the player, right? Now we had constraints making it, and now you have constraints playing it. And the constraints that we had inspired us to be creative. Now we're giving those constraints to you for you to be creative.
Yeah, exactly. Put the onus back on them. Treat them, treat them like a person who can actually problem solve, and focus on. I think part of it too, and one of the reasons why I've always really respected, the Warren Spector school of folks that he's kind of, Harvey Smith and Randy Smith and all those guys, and Dishonored being one of the more recent examples. It's it's respect the player, give them the tools, and let them create their own solutions out of that, and it's way more fulfilling to do that. And yeah.
Well, for a certain type of player, right? I mean, I do feel like if everything were those types of games, probably everything, probably a lot. We would not sell as many games generally, right?
Yeah,
because there are sort of economic pressures that come into play.
No, that's fair, and I don't necessarily mean we need to keep making Metroid over and over again, but I just mean even in small ways. And I haven't played it yet, but I've talked to a bunch of people about it, so I probably shouldn't reference it too much, but because I haven't played it yet. But the new Doom still achieving, it sounds like, being a new Doom game, right? Being a Doom game in its identity, yes, but also having some things in there. Yeah, maybe you can speak to it, but having some things in there that sound like it's giving, giving some interesting options to the player that you wouldn't expect a Doom game to have. So a little bit of modernization in there. I don't know if that's a good example, but it's not a Dishonored by any means, but
you are. I mean, you are in sort of the same player skill space. Of course, you've got the crazy weapons and all that stuff. So there are some sort of direct similarities. Where I think that Doom is kind of doing a really good job of giving you problems to solve is through its enemy design. There's quite a variety, and there's really a lot of emergent behaviors from having to deal with multiple different types, and that's where the sort of what is the player going to do about this comes into play. Like, am I going to try to stay back long enough to get off some shots with this longer range thing that's pretty powerful but slow to reload, or those sorts of things that come into play. Although the pacing is really fast in the new Doom game. I did get the platinum trophy in the new Doom game.
Oh, you did? So, wow. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. Which included playing on the insane level of difficulty up to a certain point, which is a permadeath run. So, you have to do the whole level never dying, and it's really difficult, and punishingly difficult, to the point where I figured out how to exploit the AI, because that's what I do.
Well, if it's in there.
It's in there. I found it. It wouldn't be in every level, but I agree with you, and I think that the new Doom probably is a good counterexample.
Maybe it's a good example, but I mean, the other thing about this. So post the cinematic itself, I just thought this intro was a great kind of tone, and we talked about the tone and mood of the game being a little darker, etc. And I should go back and play a little bit of Metroid 1 as well, just to refresh my memory. So you can speak to this because you did, but just coming in and not having any enemies in this opening, and just playing through and jumping and learning how to open a door with the gun and kind of simple things. Not only is it easily training you with a low pressure situation, but it's also setting the mood and the tone that something's up, it's spooky, be aware, and then once the alarm goes off, of course, there's the surprise of that boss monster that essentially takes the larva away. That was kind of a cool, spooky moment as it sort of stealths in, right, and kind of appears. Right. Yeah, and then there's the traditional timer alarm self-destruct sequence, right, where it's okay, I just jumped my way through this.
Have you learned the lessons that we were trying to?
It's a stress test, and then they tilt the level as you're going at the end, which at the time I'm sure was kind of mind blowing.
That was extraordinary. That's an example of the Mode 7 graphics. That was the highest mode. There were 8 modes of rendering, and Mode 7 allowed you to do transforms of the 2D. They're called affine transformations for those who want to know. Where basically anything you could do to a 2D image, you could rotate it, you could move it, you could shrink it, and you could stretch it, and I guess you could skew it. You see a ton of that in the Super Nintendo games, like the original Mario Kart, where you get a 3D effect of the track, is effectively that, because they've laid the track out in front of you and kind of stretched it down, and it makes it look like it has depth.
Yeah.
Because they transform it that way. So yeah, it's pretty cool what the system can do, and that you'll notice that she doesn't. She stays upright the whole time, and she that's because the sprites weren't governed by that system, so you could only do sort of this one texture basically that way, the background, one layer. I guess they called it a layer. So only the background layer was being transformed that way. I do like the layering in general. Like there's good parallax going on all over here, and some of that is enabled by the Mode 7. Like when she goes to that room with the dead people, it's a big room. There's the foreground, but there's even a thing in front of her, and then she kind of walks back and forth in front of, behind that thing. And then there's like this deep room that, you just get the sense of, this is the central room of the station. This was everybody's here for, and probably people live kind of on the outskirts. And this central room is kind of the whole, because it's like a traditional like flying saucer type, station. So you get the sense that like, okay, this whole thing is really just to support this one room. And then you go into the chamber where you have that battle. I do love the loneliness of that. Like you're going through these corridors, and then you have this sort of and it's dangerous. Yeah. It's not actually dangerous. I mean, going out, I imagine you'll die if you don't do it in under a minute. But
which I did once. I missed it once.
Oh, okay. Wow. I did it well under a minute. That wasn't a problem. But even the battle with the the sort of pteranodon looking thing, is, I think it basically, once you get down to under 30%, maybe, that's when it's going to trigger that, you're done. Because the first time I played, because I also streamed the first, couple hours of this game. But the first time I played, I spent a lot of time in that room with with that pteranodon, because I was still figuring out how to shoot, and especially how to shoot up or diagonally up, which I didn't realize was on a separate button. I always forget. I don't know why I always forget that I should look up a manual for these things. But I've been well trained on consoles in the last 15 years not to ever need to look at a manual. Yeah. But anyway, so you can use the shoulder buttons to sort of tilt to the left and to the right, or down and up, down to the left, and up to the left or right. But yeah, I had a really hard time, and I'm getting wailed on, and I'm just like, I don't am I going to die here in the first room? And then of course at some point the thing just flies away with its treasure and goes off to Zeebs.
Yeah, those are always hard when it's it's a no-win scripted ending. I'm always a little mixed on those myself, even though I'm probably to blame for something like that myself. I just, it's those rules that you don't really know what the rule set is, and you feel like you're failing, but you don't really have a full reinforcement.
I kind of like it because it's the opposite of normal blood locking. Normally, we lock the doors until you kill a bunch of stuff, and here it's, all right, we've locked the doors until you've gotten good enough at shooting to do some damage, but you've taken some damage. And it's like basically when Samus gets down below a certain level rather than the enemy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I kind of like.
It is the better of the two. I guess my point is more of, and in this case, it's going to be pretty clear what's going on, so you're not going to have this misconception because it's the first boss and you're kind of probably assuming that you're going to meet this boss again. But for me, whenever this happens and it isn't the first boss or something that's clear, I often get the feeling that I could have killed it, but it ran away, and I feel like, you know what I mean? Like I didn't know that there was a trigger there, and so like, I didn't die, but I also didn't kill it, and so should I reload and see if I can kill it? You know what I mean? Right. So anyway, it's a nuance, not a big deal.
Yeah, it's true. It doesn't communicate that well to you, although it does present you immediately with another danger to take care of.
Yeah, it distracts you, so yeah.
Right, so I think that's kind of like the...
This case is not the same, but... Yeah. But then you get out, you leave, the space station just is destroyed. Right. You get into your ship, or you're flying in your ship, which is already awesome. and which you haven't seen in 1 or 2. I mean, you may have seen the ship, but you haven't been flying around in it. And you go to a planet, and then you land on the planet, and it's raining, and she comes out of her ship, and then the ship is also a save point, and you're jumping onto the surface, and like I mentioned earlier, you can go left or right, and it turns out, as opposed to, say, Mario or something, you're supposed to go left.
Yeah, I know. And I made great hay of that on the stream, because I was like, well, I know in video games you're always supposed to go to the right, and I went to the right, and I hit a rock wall, and I said, and in this video game, I guess I'm not. And actually, I feel like it's teaching you something there, because
completely teaching you something.
Yeah, it feels like all the save spots tend to be on the left side of the sort of long channels down or whatever. Like the save rooms, as far as I noticed, there was one that, like, I've played a little bit further, because I actually continued playing because I was enjoying myself so much. But I think there are several save spots that are all kind of on the left relative to when you find them. You're always entering them from the right, with one exception where you actually pass all the way through one on the way somewhere else. So, yeah, it's interesting. But then, I also really love, you get down into getting the morph ball, and
yeah, that was good.
And you've got that little eyeball looking at you. It's creepy.
Yeah.
It's completely meaningless.
Well, did you turn into a morph ball?
I did.
While it was looking at you?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess it's meaningless, but also the fact that when you turn into a morph ball, it stops looking at you. I don't know. I took that as a little bit of a positive reinforcement moment of, like, you know what I mean? You're on the right track or something. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I agree with that.
Maybe it comes in later. I don't know. Maybe we meet those things again, and there's actually you have to go into a ball to avoid them or something. That would be cool. If that comes back up, I will give them major.
Yeah, that would be pretty amazing. You do see another one. On the way to getting the missiles.
One of the eyes.
Oh, yeah. There's another eye.
I mean, I've got multiple missiles. You mean the first missiles?
Right. No, I think it's the second ones. Well, yeah. So there's
it's hard to say which one.
Right, but there's another missile power up that you can get that gives you 5 more missiles, and it's in another room with.
Yeah, I'm up to 20 right now. So
with a morph tunnel or something like that. So you go into the room, and there's one of those eyes that looks at you, and then you can get into the morph ball and go.
Oh, okay.
And go through.
Maybe I haven't found those missiles yet. I'm up to 20 right now, but I don't.
Yeah, it'd be hard to tell you how many.
Well, that's what's going to be interesting about playing this game and it's, as far as, like, the order. We set the goal to get to the. Well, we know that there will always be certain bottlenecks, but there's definitely going to be things we're going to do out of order from each other that will be interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and when
I look ahead, I'm going to try to, like, find stuff where it's like, I think this is a pretty big gate, so at least we're all getting to the same place. But there are things that, as far as I can tell, might be optional.
That's my memory. Yeah. Well, and one of the other moments I wanted to mention, as far as to call back to the first segment in this episode, so you get help me if I'm remembering this correctly. You get the first missiles that you have access to, and I believe you pass the pink reddish doors along the way from there, but they're optional.
Yes.
So, which I think is obviously, okay, first off, that's interesting. Then when you finally get to there is a spot, because I didn't actually use the missiles on those doors. I didn't think of it at the time.
It took me a while to realize that the missiles opened that. I thought that was going to be like the charge beam or something.
Right, but if you go in linearly to the next place that you can go to, now that I think you've gotten the morph ball or what have you, you then fall down a section of the level that you can't get back up. And so they force you to use the missiles because it's the only tool you have left to try to get through that door. And they give you enemies to replenish if you run out. And so just calling back to again, it's whatever, it's design 101 kind of stuff, right? It's like the sort of learning between and the level design flow and world design flow of the sort of when you get a mechanic and then forcing you to use it. It's just brilliant stuff. And the fact that you pass doors you could have used.
Yep. It forces you to figure that stuff out. I mean, one thing that this game is missing and that I really appreciate seeing in Headlander and then later, certainly in the Metroid Prime games, is that you can't look on the map and see where the colored doors are. So you're stuck with your memory or just rehashing, the space you've covered, which I think may get problematic later on and probably will limit my ability to find like all the missile power-ups and things like that, because I'm just not going to want to bother going back through every map, ad nauseum.
Yeah.
But, at least here I did realize, and I did it more efficiently the second time I played on the stream, but I did sort of like, I get down there, I was like, well, I can't get out. So there must be a thing I can do here. Like, because you can jump up and you can see, I could get out here, but it's blocked, because you can jump up to where you'll be able to use the bomb, the morph bomb or whatever it's called. So it's great. And that calls in, that mentions another thing that that we've sort of talked about. Nintendo games, especially Metroid and Legend of Zelda, they give you the things that you need, right?
So if you are kill an enemy,
exactly. If you're out of missiles, I mean, and they actually have an order that they care about. Like if you're, and this can be frustrating because if you're fighting a boss that requires missiles, it will keep giving you lots of missiles when you're like, please just give me health so I can make it through this boss. But anyway, so we got to that. I guess that's the first boss, and it's kind of surprising. The first real boss, the first boss you can defeat.
It's a cool switcheroo, right? Because you've met those statues,
exactly.
getting other power ups, and then this one comes to life.
Yeah, that's a fantastic moment, and it's because you're sitting there, you're like, well, why won't the door open? And you have actually, I pointed this out on the stream. You've actually already seen that it will bloodlock if you noticed.
No.
So those crawly things that walk up and down the walls?
Mm-hmm.
So in the room, if you come out of where you got the morph ball, that's the first time you start to see enemies. Actually, enemies that can shoot at you.
Yeah, there's a nice surprise there, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a nice surprise. You come into this room, and now it's kind of infested with these bigger creatures, scary-looking creatures. And if you don't kill them all, the door at the end is locked. So you actually have to make sure you kill them all. Yeah, and you didn't. Yeah, I mean, you would naturally kill them all, and you wouldn't notice that. But I did, just out of curiosity, go and skip. Like I skipped the first one and then killed the rest of them. Got all the way to the end, and look, the door's locked. I had to go all the way back and kill it and go back out. So yeah, I don't know if that happens climbing up that tunnel, because that was not a thing I wanted to do twice. Because I'm terrible at the jumping, and the controllers that I'm using are not the best for this game. But yeah, I mean it basically had another kind of blood locking, which is like, you have to kill things to unlock the doors. And if you got that lesson there, if you didn't, you're getting it when you get to the boss.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, I definitely missed that. It's interesting that they would make you kill that many in that case, because I remember there being quite a few there. But
there's like 5 or 6, and going up that tunnel up, that long, hopping up, is easily like 8. So it does feel like a lot, if you miss one, to have to go back all the way, and although they are harder to dodge, I guess, in that tunnel, like they are kind of a real threat to progress, because you are jumping up to spots and they're climbing up and down. So maybe that's hard to avoid, but
yeah, I was going to ask you about the elevators because they're a nice, I don't know, elevators, the way that they're doing them, and generally I think in sci-fi games are always cool kind of tone setters, because it feels like you're really going someplace, and I kind of there's a little bit of a call back even to our first series on System Shock 2, where there's that sense of, I'm going into the depths of this planet or whatever. Right. Do you think did they do that for technical reasons? Did they need to somehow load new memory because of those? Because it seems like they're a pretty big break, but they could have just been aesthetic. I don't know.
I think they're probably aesthetic. I mean, my recollection, right? I mean, these are cartridge-based games, and essentially you're moving from RAM to RAM. Mm-hmm. It's kind of my memory of how the cartridges worked.
It's kind of long. The elevator sequences are longer than I would think they would need to be. Maybe it's map, because you have your mini map, which we haven't even talked about, or the main map. Yeah. Maybe they're moving to a different section. I'd have to go back and look. I'll have to keep an eye on it.
Yeah, well, there is that. I mean, the map is a thing that they would have to load from different places, because there is a basic map, and then there's what you've uncovered.
Yeah,
and that might be something that would take longer. But it's not like, this was a multiprocessor machine. I don't think they could do anything in the background. I mean, they could do something as part of the main loop, but I don't really. I'm really curious what they would have done there, because I don't.
Yeah, this is interesting.
I'm gonna have to look up more about the chip, because my thinking would have been at the time that it would have been just one CPU.
Yeah. It's just an interesting moment.
I'm looking at it. It says it's a single CPU, a 3.58 megahertz. Wow, 3.58 megahertz, Rico 5822. That is a chip that I am completely unfamiliar with. But even to the Nintendo 64, they had cartridge media where they just overwrote what was in sort of the main working RAM just whenever they needed to, and that was just kind of how it worked. And I have to imagine it's the same here, and that would have been. I don't even. Maybe it would have been driven on an interrupt. I'd really have to look that up. I don't know a lot about how that hardware would have worked.
Yeah, it's just called. I
never had to program for.
I made a mental note just kind of because it was such a specific thing, and they were kind of long, and I'm probably thinking too modern as far as what we can do with elevators these days for streaming and stuff. But there's a funny little moment.
I mean, you look at a Metal Gear Solid game, like Metal Gear Solid 2 even, 2 or 3, and there's this long scene where you're climbing up a ladder forever. I mean, it's just floor after floor after floor, and it's not loading. I mean, it's not doing anything, because you're going to get to the top and you're going to open a door and it's going to load anyway. It's really, we see this. There's a section like that in Final Fantasy VII where it's going down and down and down. That's why on the Final Fantasy IX.
Yeah, we talked about that on 9. Yeah.
We talked a little bit about Descent. I wondered, is this just a thing in Japan? And a listener kindly sent in some info about the different myths.
I think it's effective for this game anyway, right? Because there's this sense of this installation, that just or this planet that has multiple sections, in the sense of going into the depths and stuff. And as a segue, another note that I put down is to your point about memorization, and we were talking about the sense of really getting to know a space that is essentially kind of an open world space. Early version of that, the tile sets for each of the sections is going to be super important, of course, right? Because that's how recognizable they are. And what order and what's adjacent to what is going to be pretty critical for you, because all you really have is that map of where you've been, but they don't give you much more information about what's in each square on that map. So, you kind of need your own. Oh yeah, this is the one with those jellyfish things, or this is the one with the you know what I mean. So.
Right. Yeah, the tile choices are really good. I mean, part of that is using sort of consistent color choices to signify things. Color in particular stood out to me as okay, I know where I am because the colors that are in use. I did also like a lot of little details that happened kind of as we came in. There were lots of little bugs and stuff, this hasn't been disturbed in a while, and the insects are taking over. They basically looked like little blinking trilobites. And there is a room, I think it's kind of a large room, and then beyond it, I think, is a missile recharge station, and that's also optional. But the bugs in there, I didn't realize what was going on, but as you kill the bugs, the room gets darker. They're like literally lighting the room.
Oh, that's what that was happening. Oh, yeah. That's cool.
That's
I didn't
cool.
notice that. That's nice, yeah. That causes an effect. And there's also that section where there's those kind of, those red things with like a natural kind of cage kind of structure outside of it, like a carapace or something. And when you shoot those, more enemies come out. So they're training you just to jump over them and not shoot them, which is playing counter. So there's a lot of like nice playing to your expectations.
Yeah. So I thought that was really funny. I thought there was something wrong.
Yeah.
I was like, uh-oh. Is my Wii dying after all these years? But it's not. Anything else you want to hit with the first section? So really quick, once I got, most of the toys, I went back up to the surface and used the bomb. It sounds like you didn't maybe go back to the top, but I didn't.
Yeah,
no.
I used the bomb to get through the initial, structure or, cave to the right. You find a new colored door over there, and you're kind of bouncing around a bit, but just the sense that, again, in this kind of open worldy kind of world structure, that I thought to myself, oh, I bet you I can go up there, because they've already taught me I can go through those walls.
Right.
Then I can go all the way back to my ship, which, yes, by the way, happens to be a save point, which is awesome. And then I can go and kind of test out. And it turns out there's another blocker not far from there. But the fact that I could do it is just, it took time because it was pretty far away, but I wanted to do it. So I did it. And that's kind of, for me, like why I'm so excited to keep playing.
Right. Yeah, me too. I mean, there is absolutely, that's something we talked about back in the LucasArts days with, some of the most memorable moments in like Outlaws were this way, and in your Indiana Jones game you worked on, Infernal Machine, where you would be in a space in a level and you could see a place and you go, oh, I'm going to be able to get there.
Yeah.
And even in games that were more linear, Outlaws was a pretty linear first-person shooter for the most part, and Infernal Machine was definitely fairly linear, with a couple exceptions, I think. Couple levels, you did still have this sense of like, oh, there's this like sense of possibility. And here it's very explicit, like you can't do this now, but we've already taught you that you're going to be able to do things, as you go. You're going to open up new things, and if not for the kind of bookkeeping of doing that, I'd be, it is really exciting. I remember how many hours I plowed into a Metroid Prime. Just to try to find, every last trick, to find, every little puzzle and every little space where the level wasn't filled out. I did the same thing with Headlander. So
you platinumed that, right?
I did. Yeah, it's I want to reiterate to folks: if you are a Metroid fan, you like Metroidvanias, there's definitely something in Headlander for you, because it's a very fun game, and more people should be playing it.
Yeah, I want to check out Axiom Verge as well, and a few other things.
Yeah, that's great fun. That is not a game that I will probably ever be good enough to platinum, because there's like do this game in under such and such hours, and I'm like, yeah, I don't want to be the guy who does it in 3 hours and 1 minute. I can't.
That's rough.
Couldn't take it. Yeah. So no, I haven't tried to do that. That's for the hardcore to get those ones, but yeah, I'm a mid-core. I'm an old core.
You're an old core. I agree. The only other thing that I think we should talk about next, as we go on, I'm sure we'll come back to it, is just the start screen and having the map and then having your suit, and for this kind of game, I don't remember the order of things. I don't think did the first one have that sort of same. You can go to the start screen and see your.
You mean the suit and the layout and all that stuff?
I don't think it did, but just that, and it's very, very similar to some of the Metroid Prime stuff, of course. But I'm just betting that for the time, it was cool to have that kind of, mini kind of arming up RPG kind of element in an action game like this. But we'll talk more about that as we go.
Yeah, and you can turn things off and on. So, I wonder if that'll come into play. All right, let's take another quick break and then talk about what's next.
Sounds good.
Okay? All right. And here we are again. We're just going to give you a quick rundown of where to play to next if you're playing along. We're going to try to go until you get the ice beam and all that implies. It doesn't actually imply anything.
Yeah, but you're not sure time-wise.
I am not sure time-wise. I mean, that's one thing that I'm trying to judge, but it's probably a much bigger chunk.
Yeah, sure.
4 or 5 hours, I would guess.
Yeah.
But don't leave it to the last minute, Tim.
Yeah, that's my MO, huh?
Yeah, kind of. We'll definitely see a lot more bosses in the next time. Those who have been watching me stream have already seen me encounter a second boss. And I've actually played beyond that and actually seen another boss. So I've been seeing plenty of bosses and another boss beyond that. So I've been seeing a lot of bosses. I like the different things we get coming up. I love some of the critters. We'll have a lot to talk about next time. Strategies in terms of making your way through. I'm curious about all of it. So.
Yeah. Okay. There. I forgot what I was going to say. That's funny. Okay.
It makes for good radio.
Yeah, that's good. Good.
All right, so yeah, next time go to the ice beam, and we will see you then. In the meantime, I am Brett_Douville on the Twitters, and he is
Tim Longo Jr.
with a JR at the end.
JR.
And then the podcast can be found at Dev Game Club. You can send us email at devgameclub@gmail.com. We actually did have a couple new ratings, and one person who left a sort of good cast kind of brief review. So I appreciate those. Thanks very much. And we're maintaining that 5 stars. We like that. We want to keep that high note, singing that high note until we break the glass. And so you can reach us at devgameclub@gmail.com. I'd love to hear, for those who are playing along or remember the game fondly or just whatever, send some reminiscences and tell us what you thought of this game and what it feels like to revisit it if you are, or to play it for the first time.
Yeah,
I'd also love to hear what people's favorite Metroidvanias are because I've played several of the Metroids, but very few of the Castlevanias, so I'm really kind of curious.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too. Is people? It'd be great to hear what people think about other games that are kind of riffing off of this genre. You mentioned Shovel Knight,
yes.
I believe, right? And
yes,
Axiom Verge. Those are some of 2 pretty popular indie ones that are out in the last few years.
Yeah.
Headlander is a really recent one. Yeah.
Headlander is great because it takes that weird Double Fine humor and art, and extremely good art direction, and kind of strange premise, and turns it into a game. Yeah, Shovel Knight's great because you're a knight who attacks people by jumping on their heads with a shovel. I mean, you can't beat that.
No.
All right. You will see us on the blog at www.devgameclub.com. That's really just where the show notes go. And for those of you who like to play in a web browser, that's where you can also find us. Thanks for joining us. Good night.
Good night.